Hi, I'm Mark Raggett from ARM Architecture, and I'm here with
Andrew Lillingman from ARM Architecture.
and we're directors of the practice and have been working on this installation with Kaolin tiles for Saturday InDesign. Our design is a conical anamorph sitting over a pattern of made from Kaolin's extraordinary tiles. Andrew, do you want to describe something about the conical anamorph?
Yeah, so the installation is, as it appears here, sort of, as you see it firsthand, is like a mosaic shield or a kind of wheel. The conical anamorph comes in with the mirror in the center. So an anamorph is really like a transformational exchange between a real world object, that is the tiles around it, and what is being reflected in that 3D mirror, in this version, a cone.
So you can see that when you're standing in just the right position, you'll see in this sort of miraculous regeneration of the word eternity, reflected in what is the kind of white smudge of the shield behind, becomes reconfigured as that word eternity in the conical mirror. An accident, I suppose, of that reflection, which... Sorry, go on, Andrew.
I suppose the fun of it is about getting to that alignment point where that thing is revealed.
Yeah, that's right. You've got to find just the right spot to stand, don't you?
I.e. the sweet spot, yeah.
Yeah. It's an idea and a process, I guess, that we in the practice have been interested in for a long time. This is an old project now, I guess a paper project and a conceptual project in which a conical mirror is dropped into the plan of Philip Johnson's glass house, a famous house he designed and built for himself in Connecticut, which regenerates its own new plan. So you can see at the center of that image on the left is Johnson's original plan, and then arrayed around it is this kind of catastrophic plan that is the image that's required to be reflected in order to reconstitute Philip Johnson's plan. And then on the right, the resultant design, which looks a little bit something like this, where the building is kind of turned inside out by the reflection of the cone in the middle, which you can see is that kind of silver Christmas tree in the middle of what is a courtyard in that plan. This idea of kind of reflections and optical illusions and perspectival tricks is an idea in the visual arts that goes back many, many years. In this case, this is Hans Holbein the Younger's very famous painting, The Ambassadors, which has this strange kind of incongruous smudge at the bottom of the image. If you stand, again, in just the right spot, which is off to the right and very obliquely to the image, this skull appears, which is a kind of memento mori, a kind of reminder of death and of eternity that is otherwise incomprehensible if you just look at the image front on, which is where you'd normally expect to be standing rather than looking at it from this oblique angle. And I think that idea of a kind of a memory or incomprehensible image of eternity buried somewhere in the work is again something that we've had a long-term interest in as a practice.
So that term and those sort of concepts have found their way into a few projects. This one is the Perth Arena, a building that is now built. And here we were looking at this idea, the Eternity puzzle, named that because it would take that long to work it out. It is 209 different individual pieces. It turns out it doesn't take an eternity. It takes a couple of math wizards a couple of months to work it out. However, for us, we used it to create the building into by taking those puzzle pieces and reconfiguring them into a arena type form. So anamorphic projection found its way into this project as well in the interiors, but also out the front of the building. Here, as you arrive, you can see on the left there, you arrive, there is an entry canopy, and that entry canopy is a projection of the two front pieces of that puzzle. So the blue one, which we call the horse's head, and the white one to the right there, which is called, we were calling the bird or the swan, that is projected flat into this canopy form. So at some point, as you arrive, the two of them line up and sort of shadow each other or eclipse each other. So it becomes a sort of revealing moment for the building. In this case, a sort of wireframe version of those pieces, and a sort of strange kind of coexistence between the canopy and the building. They sort of shift around. They have this sort of kind of projection or unpeeling of the facade into a flat plane.
It's an interesting experience, isn't it? Because you get this first sense of going, it's utterly incomprehensible. But as you kind of approach that sweet spot, it becomes more and more likely, or more and more, it becomes closer and closer to you, this sense that, oh, there's something there to be found, there's a discovery, and you're looking for that spot where suddenly everything comes together into this kind of this conceptual drawing that traces over the figures of the building. It's an interesting experience, but again, it's that a building is not only experienced in, websites and magazines, but something that is experienced, kind of bodily, isn't it? You have to stand in that very spot.
I think this one was is it St. Peter's, where you sort of stand in the main forecourt, and all the columns are lined together, and there are these sort of dots in the pavement where you can stand and have that experience. So it's a sort of it's kind of urban idea as well.
For Sydney, of course, that word eternity has its own meaning and legend. Arthur Stace was a nearly illiterate veteran who used to get up at the crack of dawn and go out and write this word eternity in chalk all over the city. It said as a kind of calling, a kind of evangelism. And it was a bit of a mystery as to who he was for many years, because he did it before everyone was still in their beds. And so he was sort of known as Mr. Eternity, this sort of mysterious figure. And we're very interested in the stories of the city, and the mythologies and legends of a city that build up to form the kind of identity of a place or of a country. And this kind of humble graffiti eventually ended up, writ large across the harbour bridge, and yet it has this kind of frugal, subversive underground foundation. And so it seemed like exactly the right kind of image for us to borrow when we came to think about this this installation. And so here you see on the left a diagram of the conical catoptic anamorph, and then our version of it on the right. On the left, it would have been transcribed by hand, and on the right, generated digitally from inputs, which kind of output the kind of correct kind of transcription of that original image. And did you want to talk? Did you want to add anything to that process?
Well, I think anyone who's done technical drawing would know the sort of type of construction required for the thing on the left, and obviously it's just rays of projection from your eye reflected off that cone in the middle, and then projected out at an angle, equal angle, onto that grid. So the grid gives away the distortion or the transformation in probably more clear way to us than the actual object. And equally, when you look at the one that we did on the computer, the grid kind of helps us understand that sort of transformation, whereas eternity in its kind of projected form is totally incomprehensible.
It's only through that sort of translation device, the mirror, that it makes the incomprehensible suddenly readable, suddenly comprehensible. And only if you look at it in just the right way. And I suppose this idea of translation and of material quality is something, again, that we return back to. Here, a project for the Victorian Arts Centre, their lounges, which were underground, and I guess a kind of a game of translation here, in which a wall that could be marble is made literally of glass marbles. ARM in that year became the largest importer of glass marbles in Australia, and these were then suspended in resin, along with many other kind of intriguing objects that you could find. In this case, a set of pearls, but equally you'd find children's toys, an expired parking meter, and all sorts of other strange and interesting artifacts fossilized in these marble panels.
The Recital Centre, again, here we explored the idea of material, the sort of idea of the precious versus the disposable. Here the facade replicates that idea of a styrofoam packaging, and which in itself, styrofoam packaging obviously suggests the precious object in which it is housing, that is taken care of. So this idea that a recital centre that has a sort of, beyond that line of the facade, there is some special interior, special thing inside that the building is kind of looking after. And here we recreated the styrofoam, obviously in super huge scale, using GRC, kind of concrete product, which is sort of moulded into panels. And then some of those other things like glass and replicate those sort of bubble packing and all those sort of ideas. So as you're going, Mark, to the next slide, that interior, the recital centre, our recital centre is the one on the right there. Obviously, it is proportioned in kind of classical recital hall format, that sort of square box. And we were interested in the surface of that box, obviously working not only in a acoustic way in terms of what it needed to do to perform as a recital space, but also aesthetically as well. And it takes a lot from those historical examples of the sort of ornate and the beautiful interior. So here we recreated that by using plywood, which is actually sort of layered up. And we were thinking about that special object like the violin, the beautiful violin in a violin case. And we recreated a sort of super scale of wood out of plywood in order to achieve both sort of aesthetic, qualities to that interior, as well as the acoustic performance.
It has that thing of being kind of humble in that it's all just cut plywood, and then also being unbelievably rich as a space, and ornate as a space, much like the music for Ryan on the left. It has this kind of inherent richness, and yet a material humility in the plywood.
Yeah,
It's an interesting flip there, that it doesn't rely on gold and gilt and crystal chandeliers to make it rich. It's the material quality, kind of, or the experience of the material itself that brings that richness.
and it's got, when you're in there, it's got a overwhelming kind of quality of, as you say, richness and detail, to the point that in the grain of the wood, which is sort of cut into layers, we were hiding other little imageries, like, their ears and I think eyes and a few faces and those sort of things. So there's this sort of peering into the surface as well, which I think is what you do in those more innate halls. There's so much detail, there's figures and all sorts of things going on in there that you don't experience at first glance.
I always feel like it's like seeing the face of Jesus in your soup or something. You're not quite sure if you really saw that or not.
Well, you want those surprises.
Yeah. Well, this one's a pretty surprising one. Again, this is an old ARM one that I think predates both of us, Andrew. But it's the Kronborg Clinic, which is the drawing on the bottom. And the process was to take the famous house up on the left, which is Robert Venturi's house for his mother, the Vanna Venturi house. And that photograph of the house is dragged across a photocopier as it is photocopying. And so you get that catastrophic, smudgy image on the right, which is not yet architecture, and requires kind of translation into architecture. And the method for that is material and drawing, translating the image into that kind of material constructible thing, which the image you can see in the image below, which the result of that is this little building here. Again, humble, but rich in ideas and material quality and experience. One thing probably worth drawing attention to is that sort of black box sticking out the front, which of course in the original is inverted. It's a niche and entry into the building, whereas here it is a projection and part of the interior space. As if in making that translation of the photocopier, we made a mistake, that it looked like a projection and we misunderstood it as a niche. And of course, these things happen when you're trying to translate one thing into another. Mistakes are made. This is the administration building of the National Museum of Australia. The facade is clad in coloured tiles, many of which are black. And in this case, those tiles form a QR code, a within the mosaic. And we have this, I guess, this interest in the mosaic as forming a kind of image and pointing beyond the building. In this case, a QR code quite literally pointing beyond the building into the internet. And if you click on the draw, you can use your phone to find out where that takes you. But I guess again, that idea of the kind of mosaic, not just the material itself, but what might be made out of that material and how that material might then be expressed to kind of consolidate into something else, into some other image or expression.
This project's the atrium at Arts West at Melbourne Uni. And this is a fantastic project in terms of its exteriors and interiors, where it explores kind of the art of surface in fantastic ways. Here, this is the main atrium space, the entry space, which I think really kind of threads together the external thoroughfares outside and plazas into the building. So you get that sort of brick kind of creeping in and then kind of merging in with a stone, a beautiful stone kind of forecourt or entry court, and then those sort of arcaded columns coming in as well. So we often kind of use materials to kind of create those sort of transitional spaces or experiences as people are moving through from one to the next. But also, again, giving it that kind of ornate mosaic or traditional feeling that you experience in so many kind of cathedrals around the world. Those sort of ornate floorings.
Which I guess brings us full circle back to the Kaolin installation, which is this again a kind of mosaic, but also a kind of bringing the world into the design. So not a kind of hermetic thing, but something that kind of brings these other references and these other thought processes into the design itself. Particularly, I guess, through that word eternity, but also through this kind of mosaic pattern pointing out to kind of other architectural histories and stories as well. And I suppose the science and mathematics of illusions and of how we see and how we perceive the world.